Sunil Sampat, honor, pleasure. Thank you for coming to the School of Bass podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very excited about this. Thank you for having me.
So,
Very looking forward to this.
a lot of people on this channel might not know what you do, and there's so many things that you do. Could you please introduce yourself and tell people what you're all about and what you do for a living?
Well, I tell you what, I don't know myself, so if you ever find out, let me know. But yeah, by education and by profession, I'm an engineer. I'm a chemical engineer. I run a serious engineering company, but in my blood has got the kida of jazz, and it's always been there. And I've never tried to suppress it, but it keeps coming out all the same, and it's there, and I just love the world that this music has created for us. It's beautiful. What do I do? I also write. I've been writing on jazz for the last almost 50 years, and ever since Rolling Stone came to India, I've been writing on jazz for Rolling Stone. One of the very few people in the world writing for Rolling Stone for jazz. Not many people are doing that. They're concentrated on rock and other forms of music.
Yes.
So there.
So, you've seen the whole era of when jazz was all about dance, it was about swing, it was about creating a very celebrative environment. Now, what has happened is jazz has become a big umbrella where a lot of soundscapes happen, a lot of textures are created. And do you feel that swing aspect and the swing element of jazz altogether is kind of almost disappeared, and jazz is not really associated with dance music anymore?
No, I don't think jazz is that narrow at all. It's got a 120, 25-year history. And I look at jazz as a tapestry. And people keep contributing to it and making it more and more beautiful. And everybody puts in their own motive or their own input of some kind or the other and enrich that fabric. But it's also like a river in many ways, and you can take out of it what you want. You can have your element of swing and element of dance. You can make it serious. You can make it atonal if you want. You can do lots of things with jazz. Fortunately, I don't like to define jazz as being confined to any one thing. Jazz. The definition of jazz is always kind of eluded people, and people wonder what is jazz and where does it start and where does it end. I don't like to pen it down anywhere. I think jazz is so universal, and as I said, like a river. You can you can take a cup of water out Ganges starts, or you can take it down in the Hooghly in Calcutta, and it's the same water. But it tastes different. It has a different feel to it. But jazz is all about love. If people want to categorize it, people want to say it is only this or only that. I don't think it works like that. I think there's so much of swing and so much of dance in jazz even today. Plenty
Yeah.
of it.
But was it more earlier compared to now, like when you would think about jazz? For example, I read one of your articles and you were mentioning how during 50s till the 70s, if you would take a walk in Bombay, at the Bay, and you'll see all these jazz bands jamming, playing with a lot of musicians. There would be sax players, upright bass players, and jazz was actually playing like straight up party swing music. So compared to that time versus now, do you think it was happening much more then and then it kind of stopped? And what made it stop? Do you remember any aspect or any time?
But sort of you were actually looking at only jazz in Mumbai at that time.
Hmm.
And what had happened was that around the mid 30s, 1930s, jazz was introduced to India uh, at the Taj Mahal, hotel and ballroom. And in fact, there's a book out called the Taj Mahal Foxtrot,
Right. By
referring to that.
Naresh Fernandez.
Naresh Fernandez, yeah, yeah. And he's chronicled the history of what happened. So there was a certain type of music that was coming. It was the swing era in the US, and it was the swing era in Bombay because the musicians that came were American, and they had brought with them the contemporary music of that time. Now, in America, jazz took post-war, it took a different direction with bebop and then hard bop and cool jazz. But here we were happy with the swing that we had, that we had inherited, and the musicians that came out of that era, even the local musicians, um, they continued to play the same music. They heard the standards that were played in that particular type of music and continued with that. And since it was meant for entertainment, it was meant for dancing. Um, the commercial aspect was very important. It continued as swing music in India. I think there were many other schools of music that evolved in the US, and the 50s was a very fertile period for the growth of jazz, as you know. Um, Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie had come out with this fantastic concept of bebop, which broke away from, first of all, the big bands and then the concept of swing as it was defined at that time. And they came up with something new, and I think um, the individual musician had so much to contribute,
Hmm.
and it was his expertise and his control over the instrument that came to the fore, as opposed to the arrangements that you heard in the big bands or the vocalists that fronted those big bands.
Hmm.
Um, and as a reaction to that, really, what is the word now? Boisterous music of bebop, Miles Davis came up with his answer of cool jazz. He went to the other extreme, and so you had Birth of the Cool.
Hmm.
And all these streams never came to India. I mean, we bypassed them till fairly recently.
Hmm.
We, I was fortunate. I went to the US in the early '60s, and by that time, hard bop had become very very popular. People like Horace Silver and Monk and well even Miles coming back with his up tempo stuff. We're playing a lot of hard bop, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and at the same time there were the uh, what is the word? There was an audience for swing music, for laid back music, and vocalists, and you had people like Ella Fitzgerald and Sarah Vaughan and Carmen McRae and others fronting bands. And it's a mix of music.
Hmm.
But all that changed around 1968
Hmm.
with the introduction of electronics into jazz. And we had Bitches Brew and other music that at that time was considered tangential because it was going off what was going on in in jazz. And I think an old timer like Duke Ellington put things in perspective
Hmm.
when somebody said, "Man, you got the Beatles playing and you got the Rolling Stones playing and you got Miles playing all this electronic stuff. What do you think? Where's jazz going? What's happening to jazz?" So the wise man that he was, he said, "You must remember at all times that there are only two kinds of music, good and bad. You've got to decide what is good for you and go with it. That's
Hmm.
it." And I think that sort of tells the story of how he thought about it. And I thought it was a very mature kind of statement. He accepted what was being done
Hmm.
and he liked what was being done. But what I don't like about it is that beyond that time, the influences of the electronic influences in jazz have come to stay. And even though in the US again, they've gone back to, playing a lot of acoustic jazz, playing a lot of hard bop, a lot of people are doing that. The impression that fusion has got a lot of scope, and it has its own scope. But it's a tangent. It's not mainstream jazz in
Hmm.
any sense of the word. It is a tangent, but it's good. It's good fun.
Did you witness when the jazz era was really, really active? The jazz bands were really active in Bombay or in India in general. Then the thing faded away, right? The venues shut, and there were only a handful of places to play. Were you around in India that time when all this
You
happened?
you're talking about Bombay particularly, but I lived in Calcutta for 4 years,
Yes. So,
and there the jazz scene there was much more fertile, I think.
right.
And
Bras Gonzalez was there.
you had
Pam Crane.
Praz was there, Louis K. Pam Crane, of course, and so many of the bands they traveled from here. They went to Calcutta, and then they had their own musicians also. Uh, there's a documentary film called Finding Carlton,
Hmm.
and it was about a guy who was playing guitar. He was playing bebop guitar in Calcutta,
Okay.
Carlton Quito, Carlton
Yes.
Quito,
Yes.
and the stuff that he was playing, you could dance to it, and he would play all the popular stuff, but he would play it in a different style. And then if you requested him to continue playing bebop, he would play beyond dance bebop, and there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the music scene was very alive in Calcutta, and there was in the early 50s, the mid 50s, there was a man called Victor Feldman. I don't know if you've heard of
No,
him.
I haven't.
He played piano and played the vibes, and he has recordings with Miles Davis and with Cannonball. I mean, he was something else. But he lived 3 years in Calcutta,
Wow.
and not he was British, and he fought in the war in World War II. And when he finished in Burma, and then he moved to Calcutta to spend some happy days there, just playing music. And he wrote a tune called New Delhi. You might look that up,
Mm.
which is fantastic, played by Cannonball, and him. They've
Wow.
recorded together. And you look at Miles' album called So Near, So Far, and he's a pianist on it. And his influence in Calcutta must have been considerable because, as you know, it was the American musicians also going to Europe who influenced the local scene there. So also, I think Victor Feldman here and a few of the people who came visiting India from the US. There's a guy called Jack Teagarden, a slide trombone player.
Mhm.
There was Red Nichols, and they made a movie on him called The Five Pennies. He played the trumpet, and then you had visits from the Duke Ellington band and Dave Brubeck, and all these influences had a terrific effect on the local jazz scene. Except that the bands, when they went to work their day jobs, was only playing to entertain people, and they were essentially doing covers. But there were some very fine musicians at that time.
Hmm.
So
And
yes, I
uh,
did
s-
get to hear them. Yes.
who were these people playing to exactly? Were they the British rulers of that time? Who were these consumers
No,
of
no,
this
no,
music?
they were not in the mid 50s and to the mid 60s. There was no British people here.
Yes.
The local people like the music. We're talking in English. We have an English bias in many ways, culturally and linguistically,
Right.
and the music came through, and everybody liked to listen to Misty and what are the other tunes that were, Tequila and all the rest of the stuff that was going around.
Summertime.
People love to come and dine and dance to that music, and it was very inexpensive.
Right.
And interesting thing, in a place like Bombay, as it was called then, you had prohibition, so you couldn't drink and listen to this music. And the restaurant took advantage of that, and they would have Sunday morning jam sessions from 11 to 1 or 2, and you went there and you got your cold coffees and you could dance, and they dimmed the place down, simulated nighttime, and a lot of young people would go there and they would dance, and it would cost you no more than 4 or 5 rupees to spend an entire Sunday morning with a partner, and then enjoy the music and enjoy the fare. It was great stuff,
So now, when we think
good
of
times.
Calcutta and we think of jazz, it's just something that I eventually learned after being in music, that Calcutta was big in the jazz culture altogether. What was the exact time when it kind of everybody left Calcutta, all the jazz musicians, or something else happened. What happened there that jazz kind of almost disappeared eventually?
I think a lot of people left Calcutta because I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the late 60s, well, 67, 68, somewhere around there was this Naxalite movement, and there was a dominance of them, and the Communist Party took over, and they were very Spartan, and this entertainment was considered to be decadent. Nightclubs kind of closed down. A lot of businesses went out of Calcutta. A lot of money went out of Calcutta. But I'm happy to say that jazz has come back to Calcutta. And I know that last night, just last night, there was a revival of a jazz place where they had a dinner jazz trio set up, and they charged a pretty penny for people to go there and have a three-course meal and spend an evening listening to jazz.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So if that has come back, I think it's a great sign.
It's going to grow.
I hope so. I hope so.
Cool. So,
My heartbeat's okay, na?
it's
Yeah,
epic.
fine. Not tapping. It's not tapping too hard. Okay, fine.
So, you decided as a part of your career to become an author and start writing for Rolling Stone magazine, and First Post also is something that you write for. Was this a conscious choice that you made that I want to write this and write and get this going for myself? So I should start studying a little more deeply into who's played on which album, what kind of music grew in which manner, or was it just a passion thing and then you kind of connected it to a career as well on the side?
Sarah, it's a very funny thing. I never went looking to write. I never went asking anybody to let me write. But I was an engineering writer, and I was always, I always enjoyed writing. And one thing I really abhor is politics and pettiness, especially in jazz, especially in music. There's too much of backbiting, and too much groupism and whatever. So in the 70s, when Jazz India was formed, I was part of the group that was the core of it. But I saw already that there was going to be sides taken, and power corrupts people, and once you get into decision making, um, you have factions, and I didn't ever want to be part of that. The music is so great that it doesn't deserve any politics. It doesn't deserve any factions. So I said, no, I want to get close to the musicians. I don't want to be part of running an organization where egos clash and egos are involved. How do I do it? So when I got a call from one of the newspapers that this Jazz YATRA is coming here, and would you care to cover it? Would you write for it? I said, sure. So I got close to the musicians. I got front row seats, and I started writing. It just happened like that. And then I started writing freelance, so I never had a fixed kind of newspaper I would write for. I think I wrote for every newspaper in this city, including some that have gone under, And then I wrote for several magazines as well, many magazines. And I wrote for a few international publications. And then when Rolling Stone came here, they approached me and said, would you like to write on jazz? I said, okay, sure, I'll do that. And I did that, yeah. And it's been a good association.
Did you practice writing otherwise, that you sat down, you wanted to improve your writing skill, express yourself well? Did you practice that, or you don't remember the chain, the way it kind of occurred?
No, it was, I unlike you musicians, I didn't grow that way, no. It just came naturally to me. In school, I used to win essay contests, and I had a flair for writing. And even now, I don't inhibit myself, and I don't necessarily deeply research. A lot of feeling that goes into my writing. I try to make sure that the facts are there and in order and in the right place. But by and large, I have a feel, and what is it, my 60, 65 years of exposure to jazz, maybe has gone into my bloodstream, and maybe it flows out sometimes.
So the teaming up with Mr. Mario Miranda, which happened when Jazz Yatra
Hey, you
started.
know that? Yes, yes. Okay.
So what was the plan there? That you initiated it, or was it a mutual thing that you decided together? And then he kind of started drawing the artists and making paintings and cartoons out of that. What was the whole thing in your head that time when you teamed up with him?
No, man, as with so many things in my life, serendipity.
Hmm.
Things just fall into place. Many lovely things have just fallen into my lap. So I was writing for this newspaper, I think it's still around, called the Afternoon Dispatch and Courier. It's an afternoon newspaper, and I don't think it has much of a circulation. And it had, the owner was an iconic uh, press person by the name of Behram Contractor, otherwise known as Busy Bee.
Hmm.
And he had his famous column every Saturday in one newspaper or another. Then he started his own newspaper, and he called me in, and he said, "Somebody says that you know a thing or two about jazz." I said, will you cover? We need this thing covered for the next 3 or 4 days for the jazz festival. Will you do it? Sure. Now it just happened to be that Mario Miranda was also a friend of his,
Okay.
and Mario Miranda was also fond of jazz. So we went there. I didn't even know he was covering for the same newspaper. He was sitting next to me and sketching. I said, Mario, that's great. He says, we're writing for the same newspaper. So he says, if you tell me who you're writing about, I'll sketch that artist. And so we worked together. I said, this is beautiful. I said, it can work the other way too. If you find somebody worth sketching, you let me know and I'll try and emphasize what I have to write about that artist. We became good friends over that, and it worked out well. But I tell you, writing those days, I must tell you how it worked.
Hmm.
So one went to the jazz festival at night, came home at midnight, and then there was no internet, there were no laptops. So you typed out the whole thing
Oh,
in typewriter form. Early morning, next morning, one went to a cyber cafe to
wow.
fax what one had written, so it would get to the other side. Then you had to call up the office to find out, has it reached you? Has my fax reached you? And they, yes, but it's not legible, do it again. This kind of thing went on. It was crazy. And it had to be printed in the afternoon. So one never got any sleep for those days of the festival.
Wow.
And similarly with Mario, he would do his cartoons and he would just take them into the office there, and it worked out. So I was very happy. Very, very happy.
He seems to
And
be,
then,
yeah.
yeah, no, go ahead. He seems to be.
No, I mean, he's very naughty with his sketches also at times, like making some very humorous statements and the things that are written around. There are political statements. There are things he wants to say, but he can't uh, really say them. So he's kind of finding his own way of hacking it, making it funny. Did you participate in that aspect also? Like, for example, he's sketched a guard uh, who's checking out some women entering a gig, and
Hmm.
it's being it's I think it's part of one of the things which is being it's showcased on the internet as one of the I think one of the Jazz Yatra things only. So these kind of things he'll pick on and he'll start sketching them. Of course, there's the other aspect where he has sketched an amazing sketch of Uncle Louis and Bras Gonzalez. So
Yes.
there's one with Bondo. There's one with Ranjit Barot. Everything looks just fantastic. So this, when I read your articles, they're very positive. There's a lot of going on in there, and you mostly write about uh, straight up what you feel about things, very positively. But I could not read somewhere where you were poking somebody that, hey, this thing doesn't sound right, or this music doesn't feel right to me, things like that. Is there another side to you where you want to make certain statements about an artist or the music you heard, and you don't make them while you write articles related to them because you want things to be positive, you want things to be uplifting for the reader, for somebody who's reading a review? Or um, is this a conscious choice that I'm only going to write positively about everything I hear, If I have to make a statement which is not positive, I might team up with somebody and make it through that. May it be political or something else.
That's quite a loaded question. But I tell you what, one of my principles in life is that nobody has ever built on anything negative. If you want to go ahead in life, you want to build, you can only build on the positives. And I find I give benefit the benefit of the doubt to any musician who has come, traveled to participate in a jazz festival, that he's doing his best. He hasn't come to cheat you. He's doing his honest work. He's doing the best he can, and there is some message, some story that he's trying to relate to you. I always feel jazz musicians are telling stories, whatever they are, and it's for us to decipher what we hear. Now, I don't see any point in saying something negative about a person playing some music honestly. I mean, I heard you the other day and I liked what you played. So why would I tell you what you didn't play? I mean, why would I want to write about what you didn't do?
It's true.
I liked what you did and I comment on that because it brought me joy. And that's what I feel about all musicians. They all, every once in a while you'll have a musician who's trying to cut corners, do something strange, but I'd rather not write about that. They're not the kind of guys I want to focus on anyway. Make sense?
Makes sense because I talked to you the other day and you said I want to talk about positive things on the podcast because again it's the exact same thing you said off record also, that you want to focus on positivity, you want to create a good environment and keep everything positive. So a lot of people also now look at music journalism or being a music critic as a career, that they want to enter into the space, write for bands, write about gigs, and build their career around this. Where can one start if there's a kind of a guideline you have to give to somebody, that what should a person entering music journalism, what's the first step they need to take, what do they need to be careful about?
It's a little bit like becoming a musician also. You first have to have the passion to play something. You can't say that I'm going to start playing the bass because there's good money in it. Because, or I maybe a wrong example. Play the sax, play the saxophone like Greece because there's good money in it. But if you have the passion to play, and if you play well, the money will come. So, that will come. And I think the same thing applies in journalism. You can't decide that you want to write about jazz or the blues or whatever. Or you can't decide that I'm going to be a journalist and I will write about anything that the editor asks me to write about. You're not going to do a good job ultimately. It's got to come from within. I think it does. But I find a lot of people with a flair for writing. I find a lot of people young people with a flair for the music, who may not necessarily be able to express themselves well. And I would say to them, work on your writing, because you have to get the tools. Sorry, I shouldn't say toolkit, but you have to have the dangerous word these days. You have to have the tools to be able to express yourself, and if you know what it is that you want to convey, then just learn the lingo. That's it, and you'll be able to do it.
What do you think makes you
That's,
so expressive in your writing, particularly when you're writing about something? It's just so calming, it's expressive, everything is right about it. So is there any process you follow in terms of, I'm going to have a structure like this on my writing when I'm writing an article? Is there a structure to it? What are you studying to be more expressive? Are you just generally reading in life so that you have more to write about and more words to express yourself?
what you musicians call riyaz. You practice for several hours a day, hopefully. Uh, as a listener, I listen for several hours of the day,
Wow.
and I've always done that all my life. I started out being, a vocalist. I was to sing Hindustani classical vocals and study that. And certain discipline training has come. My mother used to be a fairly well-known singer, and that discipline has come into my listening because I realized long ago that I'm never going to be able to be a good musician myself, but I can absorb what somebody else is doing and appreciate what is happening. And so I listened a lot, and it, I assimilated all that music. Now, as far as my writing is concerned, I like to not sit and think that it's a 9 to 5 job, that this is time for me to sit and write, and therefore I should write about whatever it is. I'll give you an example. I was listening to, my wife and I are both fond of music, and she's extremely fond of Ella Fitzgerald. And we were cleaning out, bringing out some albums, and we have over 100 of her albums. And we brought some of those albums out and hadn't heard for a while. I started listening to them yesterday and today, several hours. So I said, I'm going to write about this lady and then what she's brought to the table, just like that.
Mm.
So I've written about Ella, and well, you can say it's off the cuff, but as I said, it's assimilated somewhere in my system, and all my feelings about her and her music, and my encounters and having heard her live, and the reaction I have to her music, it's all come in print. It just come. I never went to journalism school. I never. Nobody ever told me what I should write and what I shouldn't write, which makes it much easier. It's like Reese, when he plays, nobody tells him what he shouldn't play. He just plays it because he thinks it's the right thing to write, to
It's
play.
true.
Yeah, that's how it
It's
is.
true. So
So I haven't structured my writing at all. No, it just comes.
you've also consciously surrounded yourself with these experiences. Like now you talk about you've gone to see Ella live. You've seen so many other people live when uh, you were there when the album Love Supreme was being released, right?
Yeah, I
You
was
were
there,
physically
and
present there.
I was physically present. It was at Birdland in New York, and it happened to be an extremely cold February night, and it was the middle of the week. I don't know why they picked that night, but I think for me, hopefully. And I got a table in Birdland. You sat and you listened, and they had limited entry. Once all the tables were full, and all the standing room, whatever it was that you were allowed to have, was full, they closed the doors. You had to wait for the next set, or whenever somebody left. So I went there nice and early, and there was a table for two, the only table for two, which was right next to the stage. And with Coltrane and Elvin Jones playing, nobody wanted to sit next to the stage. And I was like 5 feet away from them, and I loved it. I just sat there from before the beginning to after the ending, which was 8 hours later. I was just there, nirvana.
Wow.
And something interesting happened. Something very interesting happened. Coltrane, as you know, he took very long solos,
Hmm.
and he was playing a Love Supreme, and he played the first part, and he finished his solo, and he got off the stage to hear what the band was doing, and he saw this table I was sitting on. There was an empty chair, and he said, "May I sit here with you?" And I said, "Please do." And he sat there with me, and for the next, say, 25 or 30 minutes while his band was playing, he was listening. I took the opportunity of just chatting with the man and asking him all kinds of questions, and I never wrote that interview down. I have it down somewhere. I've never published it. It was an
Wow.
entire interview with John Coltrane, which I think I should put down somewhere. I should pen. I just put it down. So he was
Was
there.
was this a conscious choice that you loved the craft so much, jazz itself, that you decided I'm going to travel, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to these gigs, that I want to experience this live for myself?
And so I was 19 when I went to the US to study. And I said, okay, fine, studies are there, it's going to be there. What are the fringe benefits? What am I going to gain out of being away from here and the experience of being in a new country? First thing, jazz. I'm going to the land of jazz, and I'll take every opportunity, bend the rules if I have to, skip classes if I have to go and catch a gig. That was my funda, and I have no regrets. And the other funda I had was whatever money I could spare in that time, let's leave this for another time. How little money was allowed out of India at that time, and you virtually struggled. I mean, I'd skip lunch to be able to buy albums, jazz albums,
Wow.
which I still have with me.
Wow.
But I got to know people like Chuck Mangione used to come to a university campus on the weekend and play. And nobody knew who he was, and I made friends with him. And, he used to bring all kinds of terrific musicians from whoever was around in that area to gig with him. And for the price of a beer, you sat and you listened to this guy, and I made friends with him. And it's a great experience. And there was he was not the only one. There's so many people I made friends with. Um, Later on, I moved to Canada, and I was living in Toronto. And listen to this. If this is not serendipity, I don't know what is. Freelance musicians are having a tough time. I think they still are worldwide. It's a given. So some of these big names would play in New York. They had their 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks of playing in New York. And then they would go to Detroit. They would drive from New York to Detroit. And halfway point was Toronto, where I lived.
Hmm.
So they would get gigs in Toronto for a week. They'd break journey from New York to Detroit by spending a week in Toronto. And I would be there every time, whoever it was. So I got to hear people like Johnny Hartman, Sonny Stitt, Oscar Peterson, Clark Terry.
Is
You
this a
know,
specific club there, which place they'll
they
all
had
go to?
they had, they had 2 or 3 clubs, and I got to know these guys very well because you know I would be there every night. I mean, they didn't have patrons as loyal as me,
Hmm.
and I got to meet these people and make friends with them, and it was just humble and modest people. Some of the greatest names in jazz. For the price of a beer, you could sit and hear them all night.
Wow.
That's serendipity. I made
So
friends also.
you have seen freelancers through the years, and you just mentioned they were having a hard time that time financially, and they still are. You, as an outsider, you're not freelancing as a musician, but you have the engineering business that you mentioned. You have all that going on for yourself. You have the writing thing going on as a freelancer. Is there any suggestion or advice you have for musicians that something they can incorporate in their lives that they don't struggle so much financially?
This music that we all love, jazz, we're talking about, has come from pain, has come from poverty, has come from slavery, has come from suffering. And I think some of the best music that comes is not from the affluent musicians. It comes from the guys who are suffering, who are doing this music just to express themselves. It's honest and true. I'm not suggesting that anybody suffer any more than they're suffering just in order to make good music. But if you've chosen music as a career, it's because you love music. It's not because somebody said to you, Saurav is doing so well, to become a bass player like him, and there's a future for you. The passion has to come from within, and then you got to do the best you can with the talent you have and with the resources you have. It helps, always helps if you have some family backing. It always helps if you have a day job. Um, But that's a very negative, again, a very negative way of looking at it. That I'll work 9 to 5 and then in the evenings I'll play music. That's not the way to do it.
Hmm.
I think there is enough scope for good musicians. I think you have to be a little bit street smart, little street savvy,
Hmm.
in order to combine your commerce with your art. I think somewhere. What do you
Hmm.
say?
I get it.
You've been through that route. So what do you say to that? How do you react to it?
Well, my thing is to always have multiple streams of income as a freelancer. Uh, I see gigs as one of the streams of income. And what I've learned from Merlin actually is to split all income, whatever you get, even if you get less money, into three parts. 30%, 33%, whatever, goes to savings, which I invest in mutual funds. 33% I keep for myself. And the last 33% goes into some sort of an emergency fund. So it keeps me safe that way financially. It's not been a problem. And even through the lockdown, I, saved up enough to have it kind of back me. And in the middle, 2, 3 months, I thought I didn't have money, but there was some sitting in the mutual funds. I didn't know about it, that I had access to it. So those things are helping me out in a way that I keep my financial streams more than one. And so I teach. I have the School of Bass, which is an online academy. Then I have my gigs, and I have a corporate project with Vasundhara, which is a separate thing. And then trying to build a few more things as time progresses. But again, I mean, I end up working and playing a lot more than anybody would usually prefer doing during the day. I'm spending about 12 to 14 hours working, and I'm able to do it because I love it. Again, end of the day, it's just, if I don't play in a day, then I don't feel fulfilled. It just feels kind of incomplete. I wanted to discuss with you something that I find very beautiful, which is the old Hindi music, which had all jazz arrangements. There are oboe parts and there are horn parts and string sections written very differently from now. So I don't know which video I saw where I saw that a lot of music, when it got kind of, it shut shop in terms of giving income to musicians. A lot of musicians moved to the Bollywood industry where the money was. And a lot of music directors had their base in Indian classical music. And all these people who were playing jazz day in, day out, they went to the music industry and they served them with these fantastic arrangements over, let's say, the movie like Albela. It has that beautiful song, Oh Beta Ji. We have Ina Mina Dika.
Yeah.
Then there are some songs which are directly picked up, like Babuji Dheere Chalna and all. But still, there's some vibe to it, some character to it. So that is Bollywood of that time. Is what people heard, they played, they incorporated that into Bollywood. Now, Bollywood sound is changing. It's kind of, this is what's being played, and then it got shifted to sounds which are not really, what's the right word? It doesn't entice you the way it used to entice people back in the 50s or the 40s, right? Of course, there are good songs coming out right now also. But as a general culture, what was happening musically that time was phenomenal. I mean, something I play at home now. Like I play O Beta Ji and I play Albela movie songs now in this time. What are your thoughts on that? That was that a very beautiful era for Bollywood altogether, where this match happened and this harmony happened?
I think listening has changed. I think the way music is made has changed. I think people listened a lot more to a smaller volume of music in the 50s. Whatever you had available was what came out of the movies. So you went to see, and the releases were not that many. So you went to see a new release on Friday, and on Saturday you liked whatever it was, and for 4 annas, for 25 paise, you could buy the 78 RPM record, which is what I used to do, by the way. Go and buy the record and listen to it till you wore it out. You could literally wear out those records, and it was wonderful because it entered your system somewhere, and you were part of it. But let me take you back a little bit before that, and that was something of a miracle that took place in new theaters in Calcutta. There was, I don't know if you've heard of K.L. Sagar,
Yes, I have.
great singer, great singer, and he went to Calcutta because he was invited there by another musician called Pankaj Malik. Now, Pankaj Malik was also a singer and a rival of Sagar's, but he was also a band leader. And for the first time ever, there was orchestration in Hindi films,
Hmm.
or in Hindi
Hmm.
theatre. And Pankaj Malik was the father of this particular movement, where he picked Western instruments, He found whoever he could find. He made arrangements, and so late 40s, early 50s in Calcutta, fairly well off. So he would finance a lot of these. And he had an orchestra pit, and he would have KL Cycle go up on stage and the orchestra playing in the pit, like a Western classical uh, performance.
Mm.
Now, it just happened to be, I told you I spent some years in Calcutta, and I was very fond of both these musicians, their own singing, and I just happened to, again, serendipity, run into Pankaj Malik sitting at leisure, getting his car serviced, where I was getting my father's car serviced. So I got to spend an hour with Pankaj Malik, and I spoke of just how he got into orchestrating music. How did he think of, instead of just having a harmonium and a tabla backing your musicians, how did you think of orchestration? And he gave me this whole story about how he didn't have to worry about the commerce part of it, how his father
Mm.
provided him with money, and how his father always said that if you believe in the arts, if you believe something is right, go ahead, I'll back you all the way, this kind of stuff. It was amazing to spend that time with the man and to find that might well have been the root of this kind of orchestration that came into even into Hindi music, into Bollywood later on. Because music that came out of Calcutta is not actually Bollywood by
Yeah, it's
definition. It
jazz.
wasn't Bombay. Yeah,
It's actually jazz.
yeah. So yeah, no, but his orchestration was very kind of, what is the word? Uh, you have a lot of music in theatre,
Mm.
in Hindi theatre, in Hindi drama, and his music came out of that sensibility. And you listen to some of the old cycle, go and listen to them a little later, uh, his renditions, and you'll see this wonderful orchestration in the back, all done by Pankaj Malik, by his vocal musician rival who helped him out. Crazy, crazy.
Yeah, even Uncle
But I
Louis.
tell you,
Yeah,
let me just finish with
yeah.
first Jazz Yatra in 1978. Um, the first day I sat, I had a ticket to sit somewhere, and I didn't cover the first day. I was covering from the second day for some reason, and I was sitting next to me was R.D. Burman and Asha Bhosle, and all through the performance of that day, we got talking, and he's talking about jazz and tell me about this, what is happening here and why, all kinds of curiosity. And I think his mind was already working into taking something out of what he heard there uh, into his music. He was quite a bit ahead of his time. So there's certainly an overlap. Yeah.
Sweet. There's I sometimes watch old interviews where uh, let's say a reporter or a journalist is interviewing an actor, right? And there is this strange relationship between them when they talk to each other, and almost I would call it disrespectful the way they talk to the interviewer. You are when you go interview somebody in the music industry, have you faced different kinds of treatment because you do not come from, let's say, you're not a musician in the playing circuit by yourself completely? You do other things, you are a journalist. Have musicians ever talked to you in a weird or a strange way? Just, just because they think, okay, another person has come or another journalist has come who does not know things very deeply about music. Now they're going to ask me some random questions. Has that happened to you ever?
No, that has never happened to me. And in fact, I have a few very interesting experiences about musicians and the way things happened. First of all, there was a guy called Dewey Redman
Mhm.
came with saxophone player came with Cedar Walton around 1987 or 88, and he had come for Jazz Yatra. And I went to the press conference, and after the press conference, I sought him out and sat and chatted with him. And he says, "Brother, I'm an old man now. Don't write about me. So I said, well, if I don't write about you and I'm talking to you, what is the point? So he said, there's a young man, a saxophone player who's going to be a great musician, and I want you to write about him. So I said, oh, who's that? He says, it's my son Joshua, Joshua Redman.
Wow.
He, so I said, how old is your son? He said, 6 years old. But he says, you take my word for it, he's going to be a great saxophone player one day. I said, okay, fine. Then I left it at that. 2010, we had a guy called Joshua Redman come to Bombay. And just by free coincidence, he had a free night. And the guys were brought him by the Blue Frog restaurant. And they had a free night for him, and they offered to have him play at the NCPA. And the NCPA wasn't into jazz at all. And Joshua Redman played at the NCPA. I remember the date, 7th of September, 2010, Sonny Rollins' birthday. So, so at the end of his gig, I went backstage, and there were all kinds of people there trying to talk to him. So I said, Joshua, I have a message from your dad from way back when. Everybody, the waters got parted, and I was led straight to him. And what are you talking about? So I told him the whole story, and some of the NCPA guys were there, and they got very excited and said, why don't we go upstairs? We have a little bar. We'll all go up and have a drink. So I said, fine, we'll go up. And I sat, and I think I was there till 2 or 3 in the morning with Joshua, just having a chat. And the next day, I got a call from the NCPA. I said, is it a good idea for the NCPA to have jazz here? I said, it's a great idea. So if we form a committee, will you be part of it? I said, sure, I will. So that's how jazz came to the NCPA. Anyway, about Joshua, I wrote the interview I did with him, and I sent it to him, and he said some very nice things to me. And I go to San Francisco because my daughter lives there, and I've met Joshua a few times and still remembers that time when he was here. Then there was another guy called Illinois Jacquet. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No, I
One
haven't.
of the great tenor saxophone players from the swing era. He played with Dexter Gordon. He played with Lionel Hampton. He wrote a song called Flying Home, which is jazz standard. And when he was here, he had again come, I think 94, I think he had come for the jazz festival in Bombay. And people went, and he said, I'm an old man. I get very tired. I don't have time for interviews. So he said this to many reporters who were there. So I hung around and said, I need 5 minutes of your time. You cannot spare 5 minutes? He says, not tonight. Can you see I'm sweating? Tomorrow. I said, okay, tomorrow what time? And he said, 1 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He had no intention of keeping his word. So I showed up, I found out where he was staying. I got his room number, and I called him from the lobby. And he says, man, I got some people coming to see me now. So when they go, maybe you can come back after that. I said, okay. And the American Consul General was there visiting him. So I saw when he left, he was back in the foyer, the Consul General. I called up I said, you promised me 3 minutes, can I come up now? And so, oh, all right, okay. I've changed into my pajamas. I need my nap because I'm playing in the evening. I said, 3 minutes, man, 3 minutes. So I went up there, and he looks at me and he says, where's your recorder? Where's your pen? Where's your notes? What are you going to do? I said, I've come to see you because I'm a fan of yours. I just want to talk to you. So broke the ice, and I was there for the next 5 hours, chatting with everything under the sun with this man, Illinois. So no, nobody has talked down to me. No,
Wow.
I talk at a musician's level, and they respect that. I think by and large, it's
That's true.
worked out well so far. Touch wood. I hope it
Have you
continues
hung
that
out
way.
with Bras Gonzalez? Like a
Yeah,
lot?
yeah, fair amount. Yeah.
Quite a big fan of his. Like, because I didn't know much about Bras until recently because I did a podcast with Uncle Louis, and that's when I go back, dig deeper into what's going on and who's playing what kind of music. And it was just phenomenal to listen to the level he was at and, kind of things he's put down. Only few recordings, but it's just phenomenal everything that he's done. And
Absolutely phenomenal.
while
Yeah.
doing this research, I came across Naresh Fernandez also. I mean, I did not know there's a book out about jazz in Bombay, which I've just ordered while I was going through, everything you've written, and then of course YouTube keeps suggesting. Do you plan to write a book about jazz at any point? Do you feel the need to do that?
I have several books in mind that I want to write. But as far as jazz is concerned, I've got about maybe 300, 250, 300 articles that I've written, which I can put together as a book.
Mm.
There is no book that I want to write beyond that, except for my personal experiences of having met people, which I have not put down in any of my articles. I would do that. But yeah, I just could put it all together and make it a book. Yeah, I could
Sounds
do that.
sounds
But
beautiful.
but but let me tell you, you asked me about Gonzalez and you went off to Taj Mahal Foxtrot. But let me tell you,
Yes.
you're from Delhi. Um, I got engaged in Delhi,
Mm.
and the day we got engaged, I took my then fiance to a place called Laguna. I don't know if it still exists. It was a nightclub, and Braz Gonzalez was the leader of the band. He was playing there, and he did all kinds of requests that we asked of him. 66, man. We're talking about history. So I've been listening to Braz a long time, and he's become a friend, a good friend, and he's a jazz philosopher. He's beyond what his instrument is and beyond his music, and you only find that in people who've elevated their craft beyond just a craft. And he's now dedicated himself to the church, as you know, and he only plays in the church. And I told him that's exactly what Coltrane did in his later years.
Mm.
And there's a church now in the name of John Coltrane, as you know. You might know.
No,
Did you know that?
I didn't know about that.
Ah, there's a church of Saint John Coltrane
Mm.
in San Francisco.
Wow.
And I've been there. I've been to that church. And I must tell you, I went to a sermon at this famous church of Saint John Coltrane. Sunday morning, 8 o'clock is the service.
Mhm.
So I showed up there at 5 to 8. And there's a stage and there's a bit of music coming from behind the stage. Then the curtains open and there's this quartet playing jazz. And the pastor in his purple robes comes out with a tenor saxophone and plays a Love Supreme. And this goes on for an hour. And it is meant that was the message that our patron saint gave us of a connect between God and music.
Wow.
So we're dedicating ourselves to that. So,
Is there any
so
common?
I told Braz that since there is also a church for Coltrane, what you're doing
Huh.
is along the same lines. Yeah.
Do you see any common thread between all these people? You've seen them in person who have just gone beyond just the instrument and they connect to a different level of, or they're tuned to a different frequency altogether. Is there a common thread between these people that you could put your hands on and say that, yeah, I see this thing, the same as in Bras Gonzalez, it's the same in Coltrane, same in somebody else. Do you see anything like that in particular?
A lot of people who are not even all that well known, who are tremendous musicians, fall into that category, who were playing for the music, who were playing for the art, who were exploring what they could do. And it wasn't for a record label or for publication. They were just doing it because they felt that was the thing to do. That was their mode of expression in life. Then there are the other people who pursued jazz as a business. There were a whole lot of them. And classic example of people who did that were those who played
Smooth jazz.
elevated jazz, smooth jazz, I can give you anything but jazz, that kind of stuff. Because it appeals, when you dumb down something, it appeals to a lot more people.
Ah,
It's much easier if the listener doesn't have to strain himself to understand what is going on. He doesn't have to work. He doesn't have to have people around him be quiet while he's listening to the music. You can do this as background music, and you buy the albums. The musician is happy. You are happy. But there are some great musicians who've gone that route,
mm.
and I'm sad it happened. But it's a fact of life.
There's a lot more to talk to you about, but as I said, this is one of many to come, and I want to do the next one in person. Just want to thank you. It just touched about an hour, and I'm very grateful that you agreed to do this. And thank you so much for doing this. We'll conclude this here. Anything you suggest for musicians or any listeners who just want to start getting into jazz? What is a good place to start if one album or two albums come to your mind to listen to for a starting jazz listener?
You'll have to give me 3 or 4 minutes for that.
No problem.
And what I wrote an article on this and how to get started listening to jazz, because it's a very enriching music. It's always, to quote Dizzy Gillespie, who said that if everyone in the world heard jazz, there'd never be another war. But not taking it that far, I think there's so much peace in jazz, there's so much love in jazz, that I would encourage people to listen to it. Now, there are so many ways you can approach jazz. Uh, Everybody has some kind of music that they're fond of. If you're fond of Bollywood music, I would say there are a few musicians to listen to if you want to go into jazz. That will take you in that direction. If you're listening to classical music, Western classical music, then I would suggest you listen to somebody like the Modern Jazz Quartet, and listen to Jacques Lussier, who played Bach in jazz style. Um, you listen to Wynton Marsalis, who plays both jazz and classical music. You listen to Dave Brubeck, and he has played with the Philharmonic Orchestra. Um, there's a transition, but you have to go with an open mind to do that. If you like rock music, then there's a certain approach to jazz that will help you. The Weather Report is one way to get there. Um, Chick Corea did a lot of so-called jazz rock, and I think that's an easy way to enter into jazz. If you are a listener of folk music, then I would say go to the Brazilian samba that has come out of folk music, and it will jazz. It'll ultimately take Stan Getz, and then you listen to some of the bebop that Stan Getz played, and you have a whole picture there.
And you're
And
converted.
so there are so many approaches to jazz. There are people who like piano, and there's so much piano jazz that I could recommend. That you could start listening to ballads played by Oscar Peterson.
Right.
You don't start with Thelonious Monk, but you listen to some of the stuff that Count Basie did. You listen to some of the big band music that's come out of the 30s and 40s, and you might like the tone of it, you might like the swing of it, and it'll take you to higher things. It's a stepwise process. There's no direct formula. But if somebody wants to get into jazz, there are many avenues, many avenues. Yeah,
It does make sense. Start from what you like and then just transition into it. Makes sense.
transition. Yeah.
Thank you so
So, what do
much.
you like in jazz? Who
Who
are your favorite jazz musicians today? Tell me, give me name two musicians who you could listen to perpetually.
I could listen to Herbie Hancock for sure.
Yeah,
And the other jazz cat I love listening to is Chet Baker because
yeah.
I find his playing, especially when he's soloing on the trumpet, it's very singable, all of it. And even when I transcribe any Chet Baker, it's much easier to understand because it's very cohesive. It's less jumpy, I would say, and it's coming from a singer's mindset rather than an instrumentalist mindset.
But
Uh,
he also sang quite well.
yeah, of course. I mean, he would make you cry definitely. Very, very emotional and deep voice. Even his My Funny Valentine, I mean, the way it comes out. So these are my, if I would say, I don't listen to jazz too much actually, but if I would step into this. But otherwise, I step into a lot of Afro-Cuban music, Afro-Cuban all-stars I like listening to, and my favorite music to play in the house actually. Just open the balcony doors and just play that music in the background and listen to it. But particularly now, after meeting you, I'm really, really, after I heard the amount of knowledge you have about the subject, like honestly, I play music for a living. I am a professional musician, but I can easily say I don't know as much about who played what, kind of music they played, who's playing on which album. I don't have knowledge about that, and I want to get deeper into that so that, as and when we talk, we communicate eventually. It's good to know where it's coming from. It helps you express yourself better as a musician. So the tapping into the history of it, uh, like I understand, for example, what kind of challenges and adversities Victor Wooten has faced and why he sounds like what he sounds like today. And when I think of his song or try to play his song and try to achieve it, then my perspective is so different. It's not just practice related. It's related to how he's a problem solver, how he has done this every day of his life, how he's created his own challenges, so on and so forth. When I think about Richard Bona's playing, how he has kind of come to a place where he's able to design such beautiful soundscapes, I kind of know their history, and it makes sense to learn that music in that manner. And same I feel about jazz, that I haven't felt a very deep connection with it properly. And I think everything has its own time. So now I feel that time is coming. Today, when I was about to interview you, I went through so many albums and they just sounded refreshing and they sounded fresh to my ears. Because earlier, when I was introduced to jazz, I was introduced as that this is study material, right? The perspective changes. So I'm not going to play study material and dance to it. I'm looking for the scale, I'm looking for the chord changes, I'm looking for all that. And that's when my relationship with jazz did not, the way it was supposed to happen didn't happen. But today was very different, sitting in the balcony and trying to do all this research, and it's just fantastic. I was like, why the hell am I not going deeper into this and checking this out a little more? It'll be so much fun to play these lines on the bass. It's nice to dance to and just choose the ones which I love rather than just choose the ones that I should listen to. So it was an eye opener. Thank you, Sunil, for inspiring me so much and
But
opening more doors.
I have to add something to what you
Yes,
said.
please.
Very, very eloquently, you've described at least your recent journey into jazz, which is wonderful. But I tell you, for forever, for as long as I can remember, I've had listening sessions in my house where I my house is open to people. You want to come and spend an evening with me listening to music? I would love to have you over. We just sit, put our feet up, and listen to music. And I'll randomly play stuff for you, and one flows into something else. And we just sit and listen. And I've done this forever. I'd like to resume once this COVID releases us from its bind. I'd like to do that again, and that you'd be one of the first people I'd like to
Yeah,
have come over. Just come over,
I'm gonna buy that
come and
first
chill,
season
man.
and be there.
And people who are listening as well. I'd be happy to share what I can. I'd be very happy to.
Thank you, Sunil. This has been great.
If if when they say about food that you are what you eat,
Hmm.
I think you become what you listen to. Also,
It's true.
that's important.
It's true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just stopping the recording and the call is on. Thank you so much, guys, for coming to the podcast, listening to it, watching it. If you would like to support the podcast, if you would like to support me, patreon.com/Saurabh Suman. Just subscribe to it and help the podcast grow. Thank you so much.